The orc woman's voice cracked as she spoke to the livestock man, her green fingers gripping the edge of the pen that held her like cattle. "Sell me cheap. I'm only an orc." Simon Zimmerman had come to the frontier market for a plow ox, not a person, and the words stopped him mid-stride between the animal pens and the labor enclosures. He turned slowly, taking in the scene he had been trying to ignore since he arrived. The livestock man, a greasy fellow named Herrick with tobacco stains in his beard, leaned against the fence with a ledger tucked under one arm. "Cheap," Herrick laughed, a wet, unpleasant sound. "Your contract's still got 4 years on it, girl." That's worth something to somebody who needs strong backs for clearing land or hauling stone. "But nobody wants an orc," she said, and Simon could hear the exhaustion in her voice, the kind that came from repeating the same truth over and over until it wore grooves in your soul. "You have had me here 3 weeks. Every buyer passes by. Just sell me cheap to someone who will take me and be done with it." She was younger than Simon had first thought, maybe 20 or 21, with the small tusks and pointed ears that marked her kind. Her skin was the green of summer leaves, dusty now from the road and the pen, and her dark hair hung in a braid that had started to fray. She wore a rough wool dress that had seen better years, and her hands, he noticed, were calloused but well-formed. Strong hands. Tired hands. "Tell you what," Herrick said, flipping open his ledger. 70 silver, and I will throw in the feed she has eaten while she has been waiting." The woman's shoulders sagged. 70 silver was an insult. An ox cost more. A horse cost 3 times that. But she nodded anyway, like she had expected nothing better. Simon's feet carried him forward before his mind had fully caught up. "What is the full buyout price?" he heard himself ask. Herrick's eyes sharpened with interest. "You looking to buy labor, friend?" "I asked what the full buyout price is, to cancel the bond entirely." The livestock man's expression shifted, calculating. "Well now, that's different from buying the contract. To void it outright." He ran a finger down a column of figures. 4 years remaining at standard indenture rates, plus the original debt that put her in bond, plus administrative fees. 300 silver. The orc woman turned to look at Simon for the first time, her amber eyes wide with something between confusion and disbelief. "You cannot be serious," she said, but he could not tell if she was speaking to him or to Herrick. Simon reached into the leather pouch at his belt. He had brought money for an ox and supplies for the winter. His farm was small, his savings smaller, but they were savings nonetheless. 300 silver pieces was every coin he had brought to market, plus a little he had been keeping aside for emergencies. It was the profit from 2 years of good harvests, careful trading, and doing without. He counted it out onto the top of the fence post, stack by careful stack, while Herrick watched with growing satisfaction and the orc woman watched with growing alarm. "Wait," she said. "What are you doing?" Simon did not answer her yet. He finished counting, then looked at Herrick. 300. Now write up the manumission papers and make it legal. Herrick was already reaching for the coins, but he paused. "You understand that buying her free means you get nothing. No labor contract, no bond, nothing to show for your silver. I understand perfectly well." "Write the papers." It took 20 minutes for Herrick to draft the document, consulting a printed form he kept in his wagon and filling in the details with a scratchy quill. The orc woman stood silent the entire time, gripping the fence so hard her knuckles had gone pale green. Twice she opened her mouth as if to speak, and twice she closed it again without making a sound. When the papers were finished, Herrick signed them, made Simon sign as the purchasing party, and then slid them across the fence. She will need to make her mark as well, acknowledging the terms. Simon picked up the papers and walked to the gate of the pen. He opened it, which made the woman step back warily and held out the document. "These are yours," he said. "You are free. No bond, no debt, no contract." Her hands shook as she took the papers. She stared at them, her eyes moving over the words as though she could not quite believe what they said. "I do not understand. You said to sell you cheap because you are only an orc," Simon said quietly. "I disagreed with the premise, so I paid full price and now you are free." "But why would you?" She stopped, her voice catching. "This is some trick. You will hold these over me, make me work to repay you, charge interest." "No." Simon spoke firmly but gently, the way he would to a frightened animal. Not because she was an animal, but because she was frightened, and he knew how to be calm in the face of fear. "Those papers are yours. The bond is void. You can walk away from here right now, go anywhere you want, and I will have no claim on you whatsoever." She looked at him as though he had spoken a foreign language. "Then why?" she whispered. "Because it was wrong," he said simply. "What they were doing to you was wrong, and I had the means to stop it, so I did." He paused, then added, "If you need work, though, I could use help on my farm. I would pay fair wages, and you would be free to leave whenever you chose. But that is your decision to make, not mine." The orc woman's legs seemed to give out beneath her. She sank down to sit on the dusty ground, still clutching the manumission papers, and for a long moment she simply breathed. Then, to Simon's alarm, she started to cry. Not loud, dramatic sobs, but quiet tears that tracked down her dusty cheeks and dripped onto the parchment in her hands. "I am sorry," she managed. "I am sorry, I have been in bond since I was 16. 5 years. I do not remember what it feels like to be free." Simon crouched down so he was at her level. "What is your name?" he asked. She wiped at her face with the back of her hand. "Zara Lightfoot. My mother gave me that name before she died." "Zara," Simon repeated, committing it to memory. "I am Simon Zimmerman. I have a farm about 10 miles west of here, near the edge of the pine forest. It is not much, just me and some chickens and a vegetable garden that needs more attention than I can give it. I came here for an ox, and I suppose now I will have to come back another time for that, but in the meantime the offer stands. Room, board, fair wages, and the freedom to leave when you want." Zara looked up at him, her amber eyes still wet. "How much? How much what? How much would you pay?" "What would the wages be?" Simon considered. 2 silver a week, plus food and a room in the house. It is a small room, but it has a window and a good mattress. If you stay through the winter and help with spring planting, I will add a bonus at harvest time. 2 silver a week was generous for farm labor. They both knew it. Zara's expression shifted from disbelief to something more cautious, more thoughtful. "And I could leave whenever you wanted. I would appreciate notice so I could plan, but yes, you could leave." She folded the manumission papers carefully and tucked them into the front of her dress, close to her heart. Then she stood, and Simon stood with her. She was tall for a woman, nearly his own height, and when she squared her shoulders there was a strength in her bearing that the bond had not quite crushed. "I will come with you," she said, "and work for you. But I am going to test you, Simon Zimmerman. I am going to watch for the moment you change the terms or try to take back my freedom, and when I find it, I will leave." "That is fair," Simon said. "I hope you will not find it, but I understand why you need to look." He collected his pack from where he had left it near the ox pens, and together they walked out of the market. Herrick watched them go with a satisfied expression, his pockets heavy with silver. The other traders and buyers watched too, some with curiosity, others with disapproval. A human man and an orc woman, walking side by side. It was not illegal, not exactly, but it was not common either, and people noticed. Simon's farm was a 2-hour walk from the market, following a well-worn road that turned to a narrow path, once they passed the last outlying homesteads. Zara walked beside him in silence for the first hour, her eyes scanning the trees and fields as though memorizing landmarks for a future escape. Simon let her be, understanding that trust could not be rushed. When they stopped to rest near a stream, Zara finally spoke. "Why did you really do it?" she asked. "And do not tell me it was just because it was wrong. People see wrong things every day and walk past them." Simon took a drink from his water flask and offered it to her. She hesitated, then accepted it. "My father was a soldier," he said. "He fought in the border wars 20 years ago, before I was born. When he came home, he would not talk about what he had seen, but he taught me something. He said that a man's character is not defined by what he believes when it costs him nothing, but by what he does when it costs him everything he has. And buying my freedom cost you everything you had." "Every silver piece I brought to market," Simon admitted. "So no ox this year, and I will have to be more careful with the winter stores, but I will manage, I always do." Zara handed back the flask. "You are either the most foolish man I have ever met or the most decent. I have not decided which yet." "Could be both," Simon said with a slight smile. They reached the farm as the sun was starting to sink toward the horizon. It was, as Simon had described, not much to look at. A small wooden house with a stone chimney, a chicken coop, a barn that needed repairs, and several fields in various states of cultivation. But it was tidy in its way, and there was a sense of care in how the woodpile was stacked and how the garden rows were laid out. "The house has 2 rooms downstairs and a loft," Simon explained as he led her inside. "I sleep in the loft. You can have the small room down here." He opened a door to reveal a space barely large enough for a narrow bed, a trunk, and a small table, but true to his word. It had a window with real glass and a mattress that looked clean and well-maintained. Zara stepped inside and set her hand on the bed, pressing down to test it. "I have not had a room of my own since I was a child," she said softly. "It is yours now," Simon said, "for as long as you want it." She turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "When will you tell me what you really want from me?" The question hung in the air between them. Simon met her gaze steadily. "I want help with the farm, that is all. I know you do not believe me yet, and that is all right. Time will show you that I mean what I say." He left her alone to settle in and went to start preparing supper. By the time Zara emerged from her room, he had a pot of stew bubbling over the fire and bread warming on a stone. She watched him work with the same wary attention she had given the landscape on their walk. "Can I help?" she asked finally. "Can you cook? Some basic things." Simon handed her a knife and a basket of carrots. "These need chopping. Smaller pieces cook faster." They worked together in a silence that was less comfortable than companionable, but it was a start. When the meal was ready, Simon set out 2 bowls and 2 spoons, serving her portion first before his own. Zara noticed. She noticed everything. The stew was simple but good, thick with vegetables and flavored with herbs from Simon's garden. Zara ate slowly at first, as though expecting something to be wrong with it, then with more appetite when nothing was. "Tomorrow I will show you the farm properly," Simon said. "You can decide what work you want to take on. I will not force you into anything." "What needs doing most?" Zara asked. "Honestly, everything. The garden needs weeding, the chickens need their coop cleaned, the barn roof has a leak, and I have been meaning to clear a new field for next year's planting. I have been doing it all myself, so I have been choosing what is urgent and letting the rest wait." Zara set down her spoon. "I am strong," she said, "stronger than I look. I can clear fields and repair roofs. I am not afraid of hard work." "I did not think you were," Simon said. After supper, as the last light faded from the sky, Simon showed Zara how to latch the door from the inside of her room. "For your privacy," he explained, "and your peace of mind." She tested the latch, sliding it closed and open again, her expression thoughtful. "Thank you," she said, and it was the first time she had thanked him without a note of suspicion in her voice. Simon nodded and retreated to the loft, leaving her to her first night of freedom in 5 years. The days that followed settled into a rhythm. Simon woke at dawn and started the fire, and by the time he had water boiling for porridge, Zara would emerge from her room, dressed and ready to work. She took to the farm tasks with a fierce determination, as though proving something to herself or to him or to the world at large. She was, as she had claimed, strong. Stronger than Simon, in fact, which became apparent when they worked together to move a fallen tree that had been blocking the path to the stream. What would have taken Simon half a day with ropes and leverage took Zara an hour of steady, methodical effort. She did not make a show of it, just lifted and hauled and stacked until the job was done. "Where did you learn to work like this?" Simon asked as they rested afterward. "The bond," Zara said shortly. 5 years of hauling and lifting and breaking rocks. They got their money's worth out of me." "What was the original debt?" Simon asked. "If you do not mind my asking." Zara was quiet for a moment, staring at her calloused hands. "My mother owed a landlord for back rent. When she died, the debt passed to me, 40 silver pieces. I was 16 and had no way to pay, so they offered me a choice: debtor's prison or indenture. I chose indenture because I thought I could work it off in a year or two." She laughed bitterly. "But they charged me for food, for housing, for the clothes on my back. Every month I owed more instead of less. By the time I ended up in Herrick's hands, the debt had grown to over 200 silver, and I had 4 years left on the contract." Simon felt anger rise in his chest, hot and tight. "That is illegal. Indenture contracts are not supposed to accrue interest, and they cannot charge you more than cost for necessities." "It is illegal if you are human," Zara said. "For orcs, the magistrates look the other way. We are not quite people in the eyes of the law, not quite animals. Somewhere in between, convenient to exploit." "That is going to change," Simon said quietly. Zara gave him a skeptical look. "One freed orc is not going to change a system that has been in place for generations." "Maybe not," Simon admitted, "but it is a start." Over the following weeks, Zara began to relax in small, almost imperceptible ways. She stopped checking the door to her room obsessively before she went to sleep. She began to offer opinions on how the farm should be run, tentatively at first, then with more confidence when Simon listened and often implemented her suggestions. She smiled occasionally, brief flashes of expression that transformed her face, but she also tested him, just as she had promised. She broke a tool through carelessness, watching to see if he would dock her wages or rage at her. He simply shrugged and said accidents happened, then showed her how to repair it. She overslept one morning, exhausted from the previous day's labor, and when she rushed out expecting anger, he had breakfast waiting and told her that rest was part of taking care of herself. The most significant test came on a market day, 6 weeks after she had arrived. Simon needed to go into the nearest village to trade eggs and vegetables for supplies, and he asked if Zara wanted to come along. "You do not have to," he added. "If you would rather stay here, that is fine, but I thought you might like a change of scenery." Zara agreed, though she was tense the entire journey. The village was small, just a cluster of buildings around a central square, but it had a proper market and a few shops. As they walked through, people stared. Some whispered. A few made gestures meant to ward off evil. Simon ignored them all, conducting his business with calm politeness. When the baker's wife refused to sell to him because he had an orc with him, Simon simply nodded, packed up his goods, and walked to the next stall. When a group of young men made crude comments as they passed, Simon placed himself between them and Zara and kept walking, his hand resting casually on the hatchet at his belt in a way that suggested he knew how to use it. Zara watched all of this with growing wonder. When they were on the road home, she finally spoke. "You did not have to do that." "Do what?" "Defend me. Stand by me when people treated you badly for being with me." Simon glanced at her. "Yes, I did. You work for me, you live on my land, and you are under my protection. Anyone who insults you insults me. That is not how most people see it. Then most people are wrong." Zara was quiet for a long time after that. When they reached the farm and were unloading the supplies, she said without looking at him, "I believe you now." "Believe me about what?" "That you meant what you said, about the freedom and the wages and all of it." She finally met his eyes. "I am not going to look for the trick anymore because I do not think there is one. You are just good, and I do not know what to do with that." Simon set down the sack he was carrying. "You do not have to do anything with it. Just be here, work if you want to work, rest if you need to rest, and let yourself breathe." "I have been in survival mode for so long," Zara said quietly. "I do not know how to do anything else." "Then learn," Simon said. "You have time now." That is what freedom means. Something shifted between them after that conversation. The wariness that had defined Zara's presence began to fade, replaced by something warmer, something that felt almost like belonging. She laughed more often, teased Simon about his terrible singing when he worked, and started to take pride in the farm as though it were partly hers. And somewhere in the midst of all that, without either of them quite noticing when it happened, Zara fell in love. It was not a sudden realization, but a gradual one, built from 100 small moments. The way Simon always served her food first, not as a gesture of subservience but of care. The way he listened when she spoke, really listened as though her words mattered. The way he worked beside her in the fields, never asking her to do anything he would not do himself. The way he had stood between her and those men in the village, his hand on his hatchet, ready to defend her without a second thought. She tried to ignore it at first. She had been free for only a few months, and she needed to focus on building a life for herself, not getting tangled up in feelings for the man who had given her that freedom. It felt too much like gratitude, and she did not want to confuse gratitude with love, but it was not gratitude. She knew that, because she felt annoyed with him sometimes when he left his tools scattered around, or when he forgot to close the chicken coop, and she had to chase down the birds, and gratitude did not include annoyance. She knew it because she found herself watching him when he was not looking, noticing the way his hands moved when he worked, the way the sun caught in his dark hair, the rare but genuine smiles that softened his usually serious face. She knew it because one evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, he fell asleep in his chair, exhausted from a long day of plowing, and her first instinct was to fetch a blanket and drape it over him, then sit and watch him sleep for a while, feeling a fierce protectiveness that had nothing to do with gratitude. She was in love with him, and she had no idea what to do about it. The problem was that Simon showed no signs of feeling the same way. He was kind to her, yes, and respectful, and he clearly valued her work and her company. But there was nothing in his behavior that suggested he saw her as anything more than an employee and a friend. And why would he? She was an orc and he was human, and those two things did not mix, not in any way that society would accept. Zara told herself it was better this way. She could work for him, save her wages, and eventually move on to build a life somewhere else. Maybe out on the frontier where people cared less about what you were and more about what you could do. She could be content with that. She would have to be. But then autumn arrived, bringing with it a complication neither of them had anticipated. It started with a letter. The post rider, who came through once a month, delivered it to Simon with a curious expression. Simon opened it, read it, and went very still. "What is wrong?" Zara asked. Simon handed her the letter. It was from Herrick, the livestock man, and it was written in language that was formal but unmistakably threatening. Herrick claimed that the manumission had been conducted under false pretenses, that Simon had not been properly informed of the contract's terms, and that therefore the transaction was fraudulent. He demanded the return of the 300 silver pieces plus interest, or he would take the matter to a magistrate and have the manumission voided. Zara's hands shook as she read. "He cannot do this," she whispered. "Can he?" "I do not know," Simon admitted, "but he is going to try." The letter specified that Herrick had already filed a complaint with the circuit magistrate, who would be holding a hearing in the village in 2 weeks' time. Both Simon and Zara were required to appear, and if they did not, the magistrate would rule in Herrick's favor by default. "He wants you back," Simon said quietly. "He must have had a buyer lined up, someone willing to pay more than 70 silver for your contract. When he could not deliver, they probably threatened him, and now he is trying to undo the sale." "But you have the papers," Zara said desperately. "I have the manumission papers. They are legal." "They are legal if the magistrate says they are legal," Simon said grimly. "And magistrates out here on the frontier have a lot of discretion. If Herrick can convince him that I acted in bad faith, or that there was some irregularity in the process, the magistrate could void it." Zara sank into a chair, the letter crumpling in her grip. "I cannot go back," she said, her voice breaking. "I cannot. I will run. I will disappear into the forest. You will not run," Simon said firmly. He knelt in front of her chair, taking her hands in his. "We are going to fight this. We are going to that hearing, and we are going to prove that the manumission was legal and binding." "How?" Zara asked. "You said yourself that the magistrate might rule against us." "Then we will find a way to make sure he does not," Simon said. "We have 2 weeks. We are going to go through every line of that original contract, find every illegal clause, every improper charge, and we are going to present evidence that Herrick was the one operating in bad faith, not me." Zara wanted to believe him, but fear was a cold weight in her chest. "What if it is not enough?" Simon squeezed her hands gently. "Then we will deal with that when it happens. But I am not giving up, and I am not letting you go without a fight." The next 2 weeks were a blur of activity. Simon rode to the village and spoke with the clerk who kept copies of all indenture contracts, paying a small fee to get a duplicate of Zara's original bond. When he brought it home and they read through it together, Zara felt sick. "40 silver original debt," she read aloud, "with a term of 2 years at standard labor rates. But look at this section. The bonded party agrees to pay for room and board at a rate of 1 silver per week, clothing and supplies as needed, and any medical care required during the term of service. And here, failure to meet weekly quotas will result in extensions of the term at a rate of 1 week per infraction." "Those clauses are illegal," Simon said, pointing to the relevant sections. "Indenture law is very clear. The contract can require you to work, but it cannot charge you for basic necessities beyond cost, and it cannot extend the term without a magistrate's approval. Herrick's predecessor, whoever held your contract before him, was breaking the law from the start." "But if it was illegal, why did no one stop it?" Zara asked. "Because no one cared," Simon said bluntly. "You were an orc, and the people enforcing the law did not think it mattered. They spent hours going through the contract, making notes, cross-referencing it with the copies of indenture law that Simon borrowed from the village clerk. By the end of the first week, they had compiled a list of 17 separate violations. By the end of the second week, they had written out a formal response to Herrick's complaint, citing each violation with references to the specific statutes. The night before the hearing, neither of them could sleep. Zara sat in the main room, staring into the fire while Simon paced. Finally, he stopped and looked at her. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he said, "I want you to know that I do not regret buying your freedom. Even if the magistrate rules against us, even if I lose every silver piece I own fighting this, I do not regret it." Zara looked up at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Why?" she asked, not for the first time. Simon crossed the room and sat down beside her. "Because you deserve to be free, Zara. Because every person deserves to be free. And because," he hesitated, then continued, his voice softer, "because I have come to care about you. Not as a worker, not as someone I helped on a whim, but as a person I admire and respect. You are brave and strong and kind, even after everything you have been through. And I could not stand by and let someone take that away from you." Zara's breath caught. "Simon, you do not have to say anything," Simon said quickly. "I just wanted you to know. Before tomorrow, before whatever happens, I wanted you to know." But Zara did have something to say. She had been holding it in for weeks, afraid to speak it aloud, but now, on the eve of a hearing that might take away everything she had gained, she could not keep silent any longer. "I care about you too," she said. "More than I should, probably. More than is wise. I told myself it was just gratitude, that I was confusing freedom with affection, but it is not that. I know what gratitude feels like, and this is different. This is," she stopped, searching for the right words. "This is wanting to stay, not because I have nowhere else to go, but because there is nowhere else I would rather be. This is lying awake at night thinking about you, worrying about you, imagining a future that includes you. This is love, Simon, and I do not know what to do with it." Simon stared at her, his expression one of stunned wonder. "You love me?" "Yes," Zara said, her voice steady despite the fear in her heart. "I love you, and I am terrified that tomorrow I am going to lose you, and I will have to live with knowing what we could have had if the world were different." Simon reached out and cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle. "The world is what we make it," he said. "And if we both want this, then we will find a way." He kissed her then, soft and tentative, as though afraid she might pull away, but Zara did not pull away. She leaned into him, her hands coming up to rest on his chest, and kissed him back with all the pent-up longing she had been carrying for weeks. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Zara whispered, "I want you to know that this right here is the happiest I have been in my entire life." "Then we will fight to keep it," Simon said, "and we will win." The hearing was held in the village's small council hall, a drafty building with a leaky roof and benches that had seen better days. The circuit magistrate was an older man named Aldrich Thorne, with a stern face and a reputation for fairness that Simon hoped would work in their favor. Herrick was already there when they arrived, along with a well-dressed man who turned out to be a contract lawyer from the nearest city. Herrick looked smug. The lawyer looked bored. Neither of them seemed to think this would take very long. Magistrate Thorne called the hearing to order and asked Herrick to present his case. The lawyer stood and delivered a smooth, practiced speech about how Simon had misrepresented himself as a buyer of labor, when in fact he had intended to manumit the orc. How Herrick had been deprived of the opportunity to negotiate a fair price for a full buyout, and how the transaction should therefore be voided and the money returned. It was a compelling argument, delivered with the kind of confidence that came from expecting to win. When the lawyer finished, Magistrate Thorne turned to Simon. "You have a response?" he asked. Simon stood, holding the folder of documents they had prepared. "I do, Your Honor." And I believe that once you review the evidence, you will see that this case is not about a disputed transaction, but about an attempt to re-enslave a woman who was illegally bonded in the first place. That got the magistrate's attention. Explain. Simon walked forward and handed the folder to Magistrate Thorne. This is a copy of the original indenture contract that bound Zara Lightfoot. As you will see, it contains multiple clauses that violate indenture law. The bonded party was charged for room and board beyond cost, was subjected to term extensions without judicial approval, and was accruing interest on the original debt, despite statutes that explicitly prohibit this practice. Magistrate Thorne opened the folder and began to read, his expression growing darker with each page. Herrick's lawyer shifted uncomfortably. Furthermore, Simon continued, when I purchased the buyout, I did so in good faith, believing that I was paying a fair price for a legal contract. I did not misrepresent my intentions to Mr. Herrick. I asked clearly for the full buyout price, I paid it in full, and I received the manumission papers in exchange. If there was any fraud in this transaction, it was on the part of the original contract holders who created an illegal bond and then profited from it for 5 years. Magistrate Thorne looked up from the documents. Mr. Herrick, did you review this contract before you accepted it for resale? Herrick's smugness had evaporated. I assumed it was legitimate, Your Honor. I trusted the previous holder. That is not an answer to my question, Magistrate Thorne said coldly. Did you review the contract? I glanced at it, Herrick admitted. Then you should have seen these illegal clauses, and yet you proceeded to sell a bond that was invalid from the start. The magistrate turned to the lawyer. Does your client have any evidence that Mr. Zimmerman acted in bad faith? The lawyer shuffled through his own papers, looking increasingly uncomfortable. We have his own admission that he intended to free the orc rather than employ her, Your Honor. Intending to manumit someone is not illegal, Magistrate Thorne said. Nor is it fraud to pay the price that was asked and then use the purchased contract as you see fit. If I buy a horse and then set it free, I am a fool, perhaps, but not a criminal. He closed the folder and looked at Herrick with evident distaste. This case is dismissed. The manumission stands as legal and binding. Furthermore, I am fining you, Mr. Herrick, 200 silver for knowingly trafficking an illegal indenture contract. If you cannot pay, you will serve the equivalent in labor. Herrick's face went red, then white. Your Honor, I did not know ignorance is not an excuse when dealing in human contracts, Magistrate Thorne said sharply. You had a responsibility to verify the legality of what you were selling. You failed. Pay the fine or serve the time. Those are your options. The lawyer was already gathering his papers, clearly eager to be done with the case. Herrick shot Simon and Zara a look of pure venom, but there was nothing he could do. The magistrate had ruled. Simon took Zara's hand as they walked out of the council hall. She was trembling, but when he looked at her, he saw that she was smiling through her tears. It is over, she whispered. It is really over. Yes, Simon said. You are free beyond any dispute. No one can take that from you now. They walked back to the farm in a daze, both of them too emotionally exhausted to talk much. But when they arrived home and Simon started to prepare supper, Zara stopped him. Wait, she said. Before we go back to normal, before we just slip back into the routine, I need to say something. Simon turned to face her. All right. Zara took a deep breath. Last night you said you cared about me and I said I loved you, and I meant it. But I also know that loving each other and building a life together are two different things. I do not want to be just your worker anymore, Simon. I do not want to be just your friend. I want to be your partner in every sense of the word. Simon's heart was pounding. What are you asking? I am asking if you want that too, Zara said. If you want me to stay, not as someone you hired, but as someone you chose. As someone who chooses you right back. Yes, Simon said without hesitation. Yes, I want that. I want you to stay. I want to build a life with you, whatever that looks like. Zara crossed the room and took his hands. Then let us make it official. Not marriage, not yet, because I want to be sure we are doing this for the right reasons and not because we just survived something terrifying together. But a partnership. A real one. I will sign on as a co-holder of this farm, and we will work it together and share in the profits and the decisions. And we will see where it goes from there. That sounds perfect, Simon said. They went to the village the next day and had the papers drawn up. Zara Lightfoot was now the named co-holder of Simon Zimmerman's farm, with equal rights and equal responsibilities. It was not a marriage, but it was a commitment, and it felt right. The months that followed were some of the happiest either of them had known. They worked the farm together, making improvements and planning for the future. They navigated the occasional awkwardness of living together as partners rather than employer and employee, figuring out how to share space and decisions and the 100 small intimacies of daily life. And slowly, carefully, they built a romance that was rooted in mutual respect and shared purpose. They courted each other the way people did on the frontier, with practical gestures and quiet affection. Simon repaired the roof of Zara's room without being asked. Zara sewed him a new shirt when his old one wore through. They sat by the fire in the evenings and talked about their days, their dreams, their fears. When winter came, they decided to combine their sleeping spaces, moving Simon's belongings down from the loft into Zara's room, which they expanded by knocking out a wall. It was a small thing, but it felt momentous, a declaration that they were building something permanent. Spring brought planting season, and with it, a question. Simon had been thinking about it for weeks, turning it over in his mind before he finally gathered the courage to ask. They were working in the garden, side by side, when he said, "Zara, will you marry me?" Zara sat back on her heels, dirt on her hands and surprise on her face. "What?" "I know we said we would wait, and we have," Simon said. "It has been almost a year since the hearing. We have built a life together, a real one, and I do not want to wait any longer to make it official. Will you marry me?" Zara's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." They were married in the village in early summer, in a simple ceremony attended by the few neighbors who had come to accept their relationship. It was not a grand affair, but it was theirs, and that was enough. The following spring, Zara discovered she was pregnant. The news brought a mix of joy and trepidation. They had talked about children, but the reality of it was both thrilling and terrifying. What would it mean to raise a child who was half orc, half human in a world that barely accepted their marriage? But when their son was born, a healthy baby with his father's dark hair and his mother's green-tinted skin, all of those fears melted away. They named him Corwin, and he became the center of their world. Corwin grew up surrounded by love, learning to work the farm alongside his parents, listening to his mother's stories of her people and his father's tales of the border wars. He was a bridge between two worlds, and he wore that identity with pride. Years passed. The farm prospered. Simon and Zara grew older, their love deepening with time rather than fading. They faced challenges, crop failures, harsh winters, the occasional prejudice from outsiders, but they faced them together, and that made all the difference. On their 10th anniversary, they sat on the porch of their expanded house, watching Corwin play in the yard. Zara leaned against Simon's shoulder, content. "You ever think about that day at the market?" she asked. "When I told Herrick to sell me cheap?" "Sometimes," Simon admitted. "Why?" "Because I think about how close I came to missing all of this." Zara said. If you had walked past, if you had not been the kind of man who stops when he sees something wrong, I would still be in bond, or I would have run and been alone. I would never have known what it feels like to be loved like this, to have a family, to have a home that is really mine. Simon kissed the top of her head. I think about it too. And I am grateful every day that I was there, that I had the means to help, and that you took a chance on me when you had every reason not to. I am glad I did, Zara said. I am glad I stayed, and I am glad I chose you. You gave me my freedom, Simon, but more than that, you gave me a reason to use it. Corwin ran up to the porch, breathless and excited, holding a frog he had caught by the stream. Look what I found, he exclaimed. Zara laughed and admired the frog, listening as Corwin chattered about his plans to build a pond for it. Simon watched them both, his heart full. This was what freedom looked like, he thought. Not just the absence of chains, but the presence of love, of choice, of a life built on your own terms with people who valued you for who you were. And it had all started with 300 silver pieces and a decision to do what was right, no matter the cost. As the sun set over the farm, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange, Simon took Zara's hand and held it, feeling the strength and warmth of her grip. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching their son play, and knew that they had built something worth fighting for. The livestock man had thought he could sell Zara cheap because she was only an orc. But Simon had seen her true value, and he had paid the full price to set her free. And in doing so, he had gained something far more precious than silver: a partner, a love, and a life that neither of them would trade for all the wealth in the world. Years later, when Corwin was old enough to understand, Zara would tell him the story of how his parents met. She would show him the manumission papers, now carefully preserved in a wooden box, and explain what they meant. She would tell him about the market, and the livestock man, and the quiet human who had paid a fortune for a stranger's freedom. And Corwin would grow up knowing that love was not about grand gestures or fairy tale romances, but about choosing to see the worth in another person and acting on that belief, even when the world said you were foolish to do so. He would grow up knowing that his mother had been strong enough to survive years of bondage and still find the courage to trust again. That his father had been brave enough to stand against injustice and gentle enough to wait for love to grow in its own time. And he would carry those lessons with him throughout his life, building his own story on the foundation his parents had laid. But all of that was still to come. For now, on this perfect evening, with the farm thriving and their family complete, Simon and Zara simply sat together and watched the stars come out, one by one, in the darkening sky. The magistrate's ruling had made Zara's freedom legal and binding, but it was the life she and Simon had built together that made it real. It was in the everyday moments, the shared meals, the joint decisions, the laughter and the occasional disagreements, the comfort of waking up beside someone who knew you and loved you anyway. Zara had been sold cheap at that market because the world had decided she was worth little. But Simon had known better. He had seen her true price, and he had paid it gladly, not expecting anything in return. And what he had received was beyond price: a love that transformed both of them, a partnership that made them stronger than either could have been alone, and a future full of possibility. As the last light faded and the crickets began their evening song, Zara squeezed Simon's hand. "I love you," she said simply. "I love you too," Simon replied, and in those words, spoken in the twilight of an ordinary day on a small frontier farm, was everything that mattered. Freedom and choice, trust and commitment, the courage to build something new in a world that had not been designed for them. Corwin came back to the porch, tired from his adventures, and climbed into his mother's lap. Zara held him close, breathing in the scent of stream water and sun-warmed skin, while Simon rested his hand on her shoulder. This was their happily ever after. Not perfect, not without struggles, but theirs. Earned through courage and paid for with kindness. Built on the foundation of a single choice made in a dusty market pen to see worth where others saw none. And it was enough. More than enough. It was everything.